Hi, this is Randal Schwartz, host of FLOSS Weekly. This week, Dan Lynch joins me. We're going to be talking about using Ruby as function as a service. You're not going to want to miss this, so stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
This is FLOSS Weekly with Randal Schwartz and Dan Lynch. Episode 533, recorded June 12, 2019. faastRuby. It's time for FLOSS Weekly, the show about free, libre, open source software. I am your host, Randal Schwartz, Merlin at Stonehenge.com, bringing you each week the movers, the shakers, the big projects, the little projects, projects you may be using every day and not aware of it, projects you might want to play with right after this show. I think today's going to be one of those. Joining me once again is my lovely and talented co-host, Dan Lynch. Dan, welcome back.
Hey, Randal. It's good to be back.
And you're in your usual Liverpool location?
I am in my little studio in Liverpool with my cactuses on the window ledge behind me there, which is not an indication of the weather, unfortunately, today. It's really cold and wet for English. Oh, it's an English summer. There you go. It's a typical British summer over here. But yeah, I'm hiding out over here.
I believe that would be cacti if you're calling it the plural.
Yeah, I thought that as well. Cacti. And not the network. There's a very popular network monitoring tool called Cacti as well, of course. Open source, we should say.
Yes. I don't think we've had them on the show yet, though. I should definitely get them on at some point there. I'm near my home. Well, I'm in my home. It's not really near it, I guess. In some ways, it's near it, but only from the inside. In Beaverton, Oregon, and it hit 97 yesterday, and it's hitting 97, 98 again today. We had some. It went up from like the 60s to like 90, like in just a day. So we're experiencing early summer here, which is really sort of awesome, and I appreciate that. I like warm weather, but not quite this hot of weather. You know, it used to be in Oregon, not to get too distracted here, but in the Portland area, we would get maybe 2 days of 3-digit temperatures. And now we're consistently getting 2 or 3 weeks of 3-digit temperatures every summer. And I will attribute that to climate change. Anybody tells me climate change is a fictional thing, I will show them Oregon's weather, because it's just gotten crazier over the last 10, 15 years. So that's pretty cool. So anyway, the show's not about us, or it's not about geography. It's about the wonderful open source projects we get to bring and talk about and do that. Today is no exception to that. We're going to be bringing Paulo Arruda on shortly, who is going to be talking to us about, I guess you pronounce it faastRuby, F-A-A-S-T Ruby. And that's functions as a service and combined with the word Ruby. From what I understand about this so far, now I'm not a Ruby expert. You would think that since Ruby is sort of the child of both Perl and Smalltalk, that I would know more about Ruby. But I played with it for a little while, and I really wasn't very happy with it, and so I just went on to other things. But this is apparently a way to deploy Ruby applications, Ruby function applications to the cloud. And that's a whole new thing. I first learned about functions as a service about, I guess, 2 years ago at an OSCON. And I went, this is amazing. You basically can start up, rather than having entire servers that are all configured the way you want them to be, you basically use just a function that acts on some event coming in and then returns some sort of response. And the cool part about that is that it can scale pretty automatically. I mean, if you get, if you're only getting 10 requests an hour, it would probably have only like one little hot process running. But if you start getting, 10 requests a second, the service like AWS or wherever you're running these, Google Cloud service, things like that, would just start scaling it. And because these functions are all like isolated, it could and they have no permanent state. They could easily like be brought up or brought down as things need to be. This is sort of like, we do Kubernetes to do scaling on a much more massive level. We're scaling entire containers. This is just scaling a function up and down. Dan, what do you know about this so far?
Well, I was actually going to ask because I'm not kind of massively up on the whole serverless movement, as they call it. I was going to ask what all of that was about, but you've kind of just explained it there, so I'm sure we can expand on that. I did have a bit of a play with faastRuby. I wasn't sure if you're supposed to call it faastRuby because of the name, which we can ask Paulo about in a bit. But yeah, it looks really cool, and it seems quite interesting. Now, unfortunately, I'm not a Ruby expert either. I'm more of a Python guy, but I can certainly draw a lot of parallels between some of the things that it's doing, and it looks really interesting.
Yeah, and I don't know what Crystal is at all, but the documentation says this runs with Ruby and Crystal, so we'll have to ask what that is too. I could have Googled for it, I guess, in the last 15 minutes, but my show prep time is so constrained by everything else that's happening in my life that it's also good though, because this way I get to be a proxy for our audience, which is really good. I mean, I ask the right questions because people like what I do, so that's really cool. So let's stop speculating. Let's stop speculating. Let's actually talk to the expert on this. Paulo, welcome to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me, guys.
And where are you speaking to us from?
I'm in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Canada.
Halifax, Canada, the
Yeah.
country I can't go to anymore, but okay, great. I'm glad I got to go there at least a few times.
I'm not going to ask why.
It's called being a felon. Okay, so that's part of it, right? Yeah, you don't get to travel there. And Australia, the two countries in the world I can't go to anymore are Canada and Australia. I've been all over the world, 62 countries, but I can't go to Canada or Australia anymore. It's so ironic. It's so ironic. Anyway, so tell us a little bit about, how do you pronounce this? faastRuby? Is that the proper pronunciation?
Yeah, it's, well, usually people say faastRuby. I say faastRuby. The idea, you got it right. The idea is to have the FAA as function as a service. But yeah, it's faastRuby. Basically, it's a platform that you can use to build Ruby applications. You can build like web applications or APIs or some services to integrate something like an if this then that for developers, basically. And it supports Ruby, obviously, because of the name, and Crystal. And I heard you saying that you don't know what Crystal is. Crystal is a really, really cool programming language that was inspired by Ruby. And so it has like pretty much the same syntax. I mean, there are some differences, but it's statically typed. So and it's compiled, so it runs like really fast. So on faastRuby, if you run a hello world in Crystal, it's about 750 times faster than running in Ruby.
Wow.
So I decided to adopt Crystal in the platform because of how familiar it is with Ruby, and it would be really easy for Ruby developers to pick it up. And if they need some speed boost, it's a great language.
Now, is this something that I would just take my existing, say, Ruby on Rails program and drop it into this, or is this a whole different mindset?
For faastRuby or for Crystal?
faastRuby.
Well, no, you couldn't drop your Ruby on Rails application. So basically, you have to build those little units that we call it functions. And each one of those little units, they do one thing and one thing really well, but they don't follow like the MVC pattern. So you couldn't really drop Rails code into a faastRuby project, for example, and get it to run. However, faastRuby can run side by side with Rails. Like if you put a project inside of the folder of a Rails app, you can host both in the same repository, and you can run the faastRuby server inside of the faastRuby project folder, and that would help you to leverage. Say you can use the Rails app for a front end and some things that Rails make it really easy. But if you want to extract something into a separate API, you could work with faastRuby like that.
So how do I think about this differently than say I would a monolithic Ruby on Rails application? What's sort of the mindset I have to have a function as a service?
Well, there's two answers to that question. So The reason why I built this platform is because I wanted to change a little bit how people see, especially the Ruby community sees serverless functions. So basically, up to let's say mid 2018, you wouldn't hear people talking about building full web apps, for example, with serverless functions. Maybe some people would say, but it wasn't really widespread as it is now. But the difference is that you really have to think about separating. I guess it's more to the microservices side than it is to the monolith side, like Rails is. So you can imagine functions like really small microservices or nano services. So there are a lot of concepts that could be leveraged from the microservices literature. For example, domain-driven design, which I'm no expert on, by the way. So don't ask me questions about domain-driven design. But yeah, so you really have to think differently. So for example, on a Rails app, everything is loaded into memory. So all the classes are accessible, and all the functionalities of your app are accessible at runtime anywhere. But when you're dealing with functions, sometimes because you want to keep functions small so they can run fast, when you need you need them to cooperate, you have to basically do async calls. Call a function from another function, and that adds a little bit of network latency. But there are ways to mitigate that. But it's a different topic.
So basically, the sort of the front view of these functions is that it's being triggered by, say, an HTTP request.
Right.
But then functions can call other functions as well to kind of distribute the load or to provide different functionality.
I would say it could be both, right? So, for example, it's not the case with Ruby because you wouldn't do a video processing with Ruby. But if you see in a generic case, if you're doing video processing, you might want to split the frames and get one function that is triggered to call a bunch of other functions that will execute something on each set of frames. So you can do that, or you can do that for functionality. So if you say that you can have an application that posts something to Slack, among other things it does. So you can have a function with the responsibility of posting to Slack, and then you invoke that function from whatever other function that is producing the data. So that's how you would separate it.
Now you keep saying serverless, but that's actually a misnomer. I mean, it's running on a server somewhere. Is this the kind of thing you'd run on AWS Lambda, or do you have your own hosting service, or where do these actually run? So
right now, faastRuby is running on DigitalOcean, but you could run it anywhere that has like a Kubernetes or a Swarm cluster. Basically, it's just the whole project is just a set of containers. And with 5 different services, so you can run it anywhere. But it's the platform was built from scratch, so it doesn't leverage Lambda or any other function as a service solutions that are out there.
And I must say, given that DigitalOcean is a frequent sponsor of this show, I really appreciate that you're doing that. I'm also a client of theirs, been a client of theirs for maybe 5 years, and I really appreciate the offerings they have, and they just keep getting better. They keep adding more and more stuff, so it's been really cool for me to be a client there, and they're super cheap, which is just crazy. I mean, compared to say anything from EC2, AWS, all that stuff. It's all just super, super cheap. So I'm very happy that you're picking DigitalOcean. Well, okay, but so there's obviously a server-side component to this. It's listening to these triggers, then is able to distribute the further triggers to the further functions. What's that code written in? Is that Ruby as well?
So the platform has 2 sides. One side, it's all written in Ruby, is that you run locally to emulate what the platform does. But the real platform running on the cloud is all written in Crystal, just to be for the sake of speed, right? But the components are very similar. The only thing that it's on the cloud and is not locally is the API that you use to basically deploy the functions to the cloud. But it's all written in Ruby and Crystal. So just to explain a little bit how it works, the whole idea it started with I wanted to do something to improve development experience. So I developed this, prototype locally that I could run locally, and then I really only built the platform to support that experience. So so when you're running locally, it's all Ruby, and on the cloud is Crystal.
Excellent. I mean, you've actually preempted my question there, Paulo, because I was going to ask what inspired this. What inspired you to come up with this? I mean, is this something that you're using to deploy stuff at the moment?
Yeah. So I have another SaaS product called Borrow.io. And some of the functionalities of the product is also actually leveraging faastRuby functions in production now. So I built it for my own sake, for my own use too. So basically, the story behind it is it's back in August last year. I was kind of between jobs. I was working for a startup that was starting to fail. Running out of money. I said, you know what? It's time to do some of the products that I had in my head. I've been thinking about serverless for a while, and I tried some other solutions in the past, and I wasn't really happy with them. And then I was Googling around, what's the status of serverless Ruby, and then I landed on a petition called serverless-ruby.org. It was basically signed by like 1,200 Ruby developers that said we want serverless Ruby, basically asking the major cloud providers to adopt Ruby as a first-class language, which back at that time nobody was doing. So then I said, well, what's the problem here? So I decided to build a platform from scratch, just a prototype, to see if there was a problem with Ruby that would prevent that from being performant. But the result was awesome. I put that on 2 DigitalOcean $5 a month boxes, and I was running a hello world in half a millisecond. And back then, if I try to run JavaScript on Lambda, for example, a node function, it would take like 3, 4, 5 milliseconds for the same hello world. I was like, I think I'm into something here. And then I put an ugly website up, posted on Reddit and Hacker News, and then the response from the community was amazing. I was like, it blew my mind. Everyone said, yeah, clearly the Ruby community was waiting for a serverless solution. So the response was awesome.
And you've almost preempted my next question as well. You're good at this. I like it. Maybe a psychic link or something. But I was just going to say, what was the response like from other people, from like other developers and stuff? Have people adopted this, or are people excited about it?
Yeah. So once people started to use and they started to ask for features and I would see that the number of downloads of the gem was increasing, and I was building on top of it, which is actually I accumulated some technical debt because of that. Like, it was never my intention to make this what it is today. So but yeah, I was just chatting with people on I created a Slack channel. There's a bunch of people there. I was talking to some people on Gitter and getting feedback from the Ruby subreddit. So they were like, I got a lot of cheers, so it was awesome.
And what does the kind of development structure like in terms of, are you getting contributions from other people? Do you get patches, or is it all kind of on your kind of head at the moment, on your shoulders, should I say?
So up to, I'd say, a month ago, most of it was on my shoulders. So because of the way this all happened, I had some people already using and having some production workloads in the platform, even though I don't charge people to use it. But people rely on it now. So when I thought, okay, I'm going to release the source code, but then because of some security reasons, I wanted to do a review with some other people, not just me, before I released this code. So some people approached and helped me with that. And since about a month ago, I've been working with another guy called Tyler Close, and he's helping me to. I'm basically extracting the functionality of the platform written in Crystal and rewriting that in Ruby. And that part, I'm gonna open source all that side too. So right now, it's open source is the client side and the development toolkit, but the platform is still closed. But I'm working on this new version that will come out, and it'll be all open for everyone.
Excellent. And I was wondering about that because I was looking at the licensing today, and and some of the stuff, and immediately kind of red flags raising because we were saying, oh, is this proprietary on the server and stuff? But you've explained the reason for that, and I think that makes sense because you want to make sure it's properly audited and all the rest of it. And it's a lot of work for you to do on your own, of course. So it's good to have other people to look over it and help out with that. Now you are really committed to open source, aren't you? Because I was looking through some of your other work and stuff, and it seems to be quite important to you. Why did you want this to be open source, and why was that important to you?
Well, I've been using open source for a long time, and I always felt a little bit of guilt, to not have contributed back. And I feel like now I'm in a good point in my life that I accumulated experience, and my background is with DevOps and a little bit of development. So I thought, well, maybe it's time to contribute now. So that's why I committed to do that. I think I owe a lot of my career to open source, right? So I decided to make a contribution now.
Excellent. And in terms of I know we all live in the real world where we have to pay bills and stuff. Is there a pay model for this service? Is there something you see going forward, or where you might, generate money out of it? Because I'm assuming it's a side project for alongside the day job, if you like.
Yeah, so I have a day job as a DevOps engineer, but I really want to work on faastRuby full time. So about 6 months ago, I started going in the route of okay, I'm gonna build a company, a cloud business, and I partnered up with a couple of other folks, and we started a process of raising money. We got some good connections. Things were moving forward, but then the stress was just getting to levels unseen in my life before. I have two kids and a job, so I was working basically 18-hour days to get this thing moving forward, and it stopped being cool too, because before it was just this nice platform that I was working on. All of a sudden I had to deal with investor decks and a bunch of all those things, and that's I understand that's a requirement for raising money, but I started to rethink, what is it that I really want to do, and I decided to go a different route. I was looking into sponsorships or situations where a company would like to hire me to work on that project, and if they want to use it. So actually, if there's anybody in the audience that is really interested in pushing serverless Ruby forward, and if you like the faastRuby project, hire me so I can work on it full time.
Oh, excellent. And I can relate to that. It's kind of wanting to be an engineer rather than say a business person or the kind of doing the legal stuff and all the rest of it. It's a totally different kind of game. I've seen a lot of developers over the years who start a project and get further and further away from the actual code as they have other stuff to do, and that's not necessarily the fun bit for them. It depends. Everyone's different, of course. But there we go. I say with all my knowledge of experience of not doing any of those things with the startup, by the way. So let's talk a bit more about the kind of technical side of this then. So the whole serverless thing is not something that I'm really massively familiar with, if I'm honest. I mean, I know it's relatively recent. What is the kind of argument for running a serverless application? If I'm coming to make myself a web application, I've done a lot of that, but I tend to do more kind of like maybe modular applications, but not quite to this degree. What's the advantage of me using a serverless kind of approach?
I think the advantage is it's on the developer experience basically. So as a DevOps consultant, I see what I work in some clients that are big enterprise, and I see they struggle through this DevOps transformation. So they have those guys like developing Java for like 10, 15 years on the job, and all of a sudden somebody's saying, hey, we got to do DevOps here, and you have to learn what like containers, Docker, Kubernetes, a bunch of stuff. So all of a sudden you don't just code anymore. So I think that the whole serverless movement is applying all the DevOps concepts, but abstracting away the infrastructure from the developers. So the concept of serverless is still, I don't think that there is like an agreed concept for it. A lot of people say that it's infrastructure is abstracted away, and you only pay for what you use, which means you only pay in case of Lambda, for example, you pay per 100 millisecond of execution time. But I tend to disagree with this last bit. I don't think that it has anything to do with how you pay for it. I think it's more like about the developer experience. So developers shouldn't have to do anything besides live inside of their favorite code editor and finish their stuff, push to the repository, and have it all just magically work.
And I mean, I agree. It sounds fantastic. I mean, I suppose I'm maybe showing my age here, but coming from like a kind of old school development kind of background, I'm wondering about things like database connections. I mean, how does that work when you've got lots of little things? How are you maintaining state and calling, keeping your database connections open if you are, and things like that? How does it work on a kind of practical level?
Yeah. So in faastRuby's case. You have to use a database connector. So basically, on faastRuby, when you run a function and the function is done executing, the process dies. So there's no way to keep a database connection open. So the way to do it is to use a separate service that would do sort of like a over network database pooling. So it's not a full solution, but it's better than having to connect, authenticate, and then send the query every time. So basically, by having a separate service that keep those connections open for your project, and then you use that as almost like as a database proxy to solve that problem. But other solutions out there. For example, Lambda or OpenFast is another open source function as a service project that is really nice because they have a container per function, so they can keep that container running and somehow keep that connection open. So there's an advantage on that point, but there are other disadvantages like code start times that you don't have on faastRuby, for example.
Dan and I have been chatting in the back chat, and we've both been appreciating your attitude about having used open source and therefore wanting to contribute back to open source. And I wish you the best of luck with this project to be able to do that. I've got a couple of technical questions now. I'm again slightly naive in Ruby. Can I include other gems in the functions I upload, or does it just have to be pure Ruby?
No, you can definitely include other gems. So basically, if you download the faastRuby CLI and you do like faastRuby new and a function name, you initialize like a skeleton function, and there's a gem file there. You can write tests. So every function has its own set of gems and its own tests. And when you deploy, all those things happen in the cloud. So when you deploy, your gems are installed and your tests run. And if your tests fail, the deploy doesn't happen. So
Oh, so you built testing as part of the primary key of the framework.
Yes.
Good. There's so many people that wait and either don't add tests. I'm not looking in ZipRecruiter's direction just now, am I? No, okay. Or I could also look at me for insight quizzes. There's no tests and all of that stuff. Okay.
Well, everybody's a little guilty of that.
Well, speaking of that, how are you testing? This is sort of a framework. How are you testing this framework?
Oh, that's a good question. So one of the tests, it's not many tests out there. So I have some tests for the GM, basically the stuff that happens in the client side. But I think I have to be honest here and say there are no many tests on the platform side, which is what I'm trying to change now with the open source release. One of the things that one of my goals is write better code, because stuff was I was building it on top of a proof of concept, right? So it's the code that is clear to understand and so easier to test, and then it will come with a good test suite, probably our stack or mini test. We're still working on it.
Well, so once you create the Ruby version of your cloud side and provide that for me to be able to just run it on-prem without even talking to you, what's your profit model going to be?
That's a good question. I
ask good questions. That's why they hire me to do this.
So I intend to monetize the cloud, right? So my idea is to release, make this new release of all full open source, and if you want to run it yourself, here's how. But if you want the fastest and the best way to run faastRuby functions in the cloud, then you're gonna pay the official faastRuby cloud. So basically that would be the monetization. But there are some other things that can be done. For example, you can develop extensions. I mean, there's so much more about the platform that I could talk about here. So, for example, the whole idea is that your local development environment is extensible, right? So somebody could write an extension that will integrate Vue.js, for example, with a faastRuby project. So as you're developing it, your JavaScript code that gets compiled automatically, and when you deploy that project, it all goes to the cloud, and you have your Vue.js app and a nice backend API for it. So so you can imagine that in the future there is like an extension store with all sorts of integrations, like for pair programming, to integrate with different frameworks, and the sky's the limit. So, and the other piece of it is that functions, they can be templates as well, right? So the same way you have libraries or gems for Ruby, once you have a nice set of functions to perform authentication, or to talk to Stripe, or to push something to Slack, my idea is to have this store online that people can just go and build their own projects by just clicking on what they have. So imagine when you go to the Bootstrap website and try to buy a Bootstrap template, and the templates are awesome, but they don't really do much. It's just really for front-end developers to give them a kickstart. Now imagine if you could buy those that are actually SaaS applications that work, and then all you have to do is modify some things and add some of the business logic you want. So that's where I'm going. And I think that there's a way to monetize that in the future, maybe by selling those like premium templates or something like that.
Have you also considered maybe providing consulting services, you and a team of programmers, to actually build faastRuby applications?
Yeah, for sure. One of the things that I started to do a while ago was reach out to some dev shops I know and say, hey, do you guys want to start using that, and help out, and kind of share that burden too, So that's definitely something that that I do, and I think that fits really nicely what I said earlier about getting sponsored by some company that wants to see serverless Ruby. It could be in that kind of model too. If they want to use it, they can pay me as a consultant, and I will help them to use it. And that would also help me to work on the platform.
Sure, because I made a healthy living for 30 years off something that Larry Wall gave away for free. So I've been having a great time doing that, and it seems to have paid the bills, kept me off the street and out of jail. Well, almost out of jail. Not definitely out of jail, but not out of trouble, like we said at the beginning of the show. What was the question I was going to? Rats. Now I lost the question. Oh, I was going to say that when you were noticing that DigitalOcean was so much faster, it's because all of DigitalOcean's machines are SSD. And I know that most of EC2 isn't, unless you buy the more expensive per hour machines. Did you consider that when you thought how much faster it was?
No, actually. Yeah, that's a good point. But I on the cloud, I basically serve the function files over NFS, and I leverage a lot of memory caching for that. So a lot of stuff is just sitting in memory anyways. But yeah, I found that DigitalOcean, I mean, I could talk about them for a long time. Like I love those guys. Like their products are awesome, and the price point is just right. So thank you, DigitalOcean.
Yes, I have two machines with them right now, and I'm very, very happy with them. I'm actually considering moving my main machine for Stunnet.com over there sometime soon. So just haven't had the what do you call it? Well, be non-billable hours. I need billable hours. I don't need non-billable hours. So I haven't had the time to actually do the work. It's like the shoemaker's children problem, where like the shoemaker's kids never have good shoes because the shoemaker's too busy working on everybody else's shoes. So that's sort of where I'm at that way. So when we say function, are we talking something that's only 5 lines long, or could it be in the hundreds of lines for a particular function?
Well, now I can speak for faastRuby, because every time you trigger a function, it gets required on the fly. If you make it too big, or if you make it requiring too many files, the performance, it will have a performance impact there. But it's funny because I almost wish I could minify Ruby, like people minify JavaScript, but there's no tool out there to do that. But that'd be great if somebody's listening. If you can build a Ruby minifier, that'd be awesome. I actually I say those two things to people who ask me about that, like fast functions don't require many files, and fast functions are small in scope and size, right? So because you want it to not only run as fast as possible, but to load as fast as possible.
Well, is it actually compiling the source code every time you invoke the function? Well,
it's just Ruby interpreting it, right? So every time there is an HTTP request, I have what I call runners. They're like already pre-warmed. I have like hundreds of them, and when you trigger a function, a runner will randomly get selected, and will just require that function based on the URL path and the workspace that you use on the cloud. And then require that file and execute, but that happens in a process that is already running. So it's not like I do Ruby-E or because that takes a long time. That takes like 100 milliseconds or so to start, right? So basically, I have a bunch of those processes of Ruby already loaded and a bunch of gems already loaded, gems that I know that people use, the most. And then I fork that process, and every time there is an invocation, the fork process is like pretty clean and waiting for that payload with the instructions which function to run, and it will require the code inside of that forked process, and then execute it, and then respond back to the main process, and that fork dies. and another fork happens. So every time a function runs, it runs inside of like a fresh new process. So that's how I avoid also code from leaking from one function to another. I mean, there's much more than that. There's some kernel security things like seccomp and Linux capabilities and things like using a different Docker runtime. There's a lot more to the security of it, but that's it in a nutshell, I'd say.
So the obviously the end user trigger would be like an end user web browser. Are you also able to do like a REST API easily?
Yeah, it's basically the same thing. So when you start a faastRuby project, you have a folder inside of the project that is called functions. So everything you put inside of those folders, if you create a subdirectory called, I don't know, foo, and another one called bar, when you add a file, if you have the local development environment running, when you add a file inside of any of those folders called handler.rb or handler.cr for Crystal, the faastRuby watchdog process detects that you want that folder to be a function, and then it initializes the handler file for you, puts there the method handler, and puts a skeleton there for you, and that function that folder becomes a function. So when you deploy that function, the root path of that function will correspond to the URL path. So you can create APIs, maybe not REST APIs. This is something I'm working on to accept URL parameters. So you would need that to be REST compatible. But yeah, you can definitely do something similar. Yeah, right now.
And then what other triggers are there besides HTTP requests?
So there is an events trigger, but that's unreleased yet. It's there, it works, but I haven't told anybody yet. So if you're listening to that, don't use it.
Don't use it.
Now makes you want to download this thing just to use that. But okay.
No, it's because I haven't had a chance to account for the case of infinite loops, right? So
that would not be good. That would not be good.
I mean, you won't damage anybody else in the platform, but your stuff will get stuck for 60 seconds, which is the max amount of time that allow a function to run. But I just don't want you. I just don't want you to have a frustrating experience trying to use events, and because it could become messy. Like to give this to people, I want to give them a way to visualize what's going on and properly trace it. It's still in alpha,
So when we were talking earlier about functions calling other functions, you're expecting that to use something like an HTTP interface then, right?
Yes, but I provide that as a helper method. So basically, I try to make it as similar to an RPC call as I can. So for example, in Ruby, when you require a file, you do require and the file name without .rb. So I created a method that you can put on top of your function that says require function, and then you pass the function name, and then you can pass another parameter, which is the string that will become a constant that can be used to call that function. So when you do, say, let's say that you call a groceries function. So require function groceries, and then ask groceries with capital G. In your code, when you call groceries.call and pass parameters to it, it actually invokes the other function asynchronously, passing those parameters. And then what I usually tell people to do is to do that as early as possible in the function execution, and then do some other stuff while you're waiting for the response. And then you only call the result of that invocation when you need it. So that's when the function the code will block and wait for the response if the response hasn't arrived yet. But it all happens internally. It's not like I go over the internet and back. It's really fast, basically.
So is this production ready at the moment then, Paulo? If I were to try to deploy something now, how are we doing?
Well, I'd like to say it is production ready. I've been using it for production, but it's still version 0.5, right? So I expect to have a 1.0, early next year. So I'm trying to take a slow approach, make it as stable as possible. But yeah, you can definitely use it. There are tons of people using it. There's some more stuff you can schedule, which is one of the first features that the people from the community asked, was a way to schedule functions to run at a certain time. So there's people that get stocks every morning using faastRuby functions, and and then send to their SMS, send an SMS to themselves, or post it on Slack, or so there's several jobs running, so you can use that as well.
Excellent. And if you do get to your 1.0 in a year, that's not slow by open source standards, by some of the projects numbering schemes that we've seen over the years. It's like 25 years to get to version 1.0. Anyway, so yeah, and what about so I was looking at you've got a community section on your website, which is really interesting, and you've got some people have made templates that are contributed. So what is a template? Is it just an outline of an application that I can take, that I can build on?
Yeah, so right now a template is basically a function that somebody built. For example, one of the templates that are there is for SendGrid. So you don't need to write a function to send an email to SendGrid. You can just include that function in your project. So basically, when you use the command line, when you do faastRuby new and you pass a name, if you do --template in a GitHub URL, you would just check out that code for that function and add it to your project. So that's really the basic functionality that allows for the function marketplace that I was talking about.
Excellent. And I noticed that you're also looking for ambassadors at the moment. So how do people become an ambassador? Why should people, this is your chance to kind of, I suppose, give a call out to people to come and get involved and become ambassadors and so on. What is an ambassador in your eyes?
Well, there are several Ruby meetups all over the world, right? So if you love open source, and if you love serverless, and you want to see serverless, deep ingrained the Ruby community, and you're excited about this project, just reach out to me, and I'd love to send you some stickers and give you some material so you can do talks on Ruby meetups anywhere or close to where you live. So.
Excellent. So literally spreading the word, spreading the good word about the project. That sounds great. Now, what other kind of things do you need? Do you need any contributors? So, at the moment, what kind of help could people give you? Is there any other things they can do, like maybe, checking for bugs or contributing maybe patches or something?
Yeah, so I would really appreciate some help. Tyler and I, we're swamped, with we're working into extracting the functionality, from the cloud and from the current faastRuby gem into this project that is on GitHub. So if you're willing to, contribute patches or security review or documentation, tutorials, or, anything, we're looking for help on all those fronts for sure. So if you just reach out to me.
Excellent. And as we always try and say to people on this show and on other shows as well, that you don't have to be necessarily a hardcore, amazing, developer or a Ruby expert or anything to contribute. As you say, you need translations, you need documentation. There's a whole array of skills that people can bring. So everyone can contribute something, I would think. So. Yeah, and what's your kind of roadmap for this? Do you have a plan for where you want to go? Or you kind of did mention that you're hoping to get to 1.0 next year. So what's that kind of roadmap like? So
the idea is the first thing that I want to do is to release this new open source version that could be self-hosted by anyone, and work on documentation for it. So I expect for that to be done by August if we continue on the pace that we are right now. And then from that point on, the system to create extensions for the local development environment will be up. and the ability to integrate faastRuby with anything, even Rails. If you're out there, you're excited about Rails and excited about serverless, there is a way to integrate it with Rails. So reach out to me and I'll tell you how. But the roadmap. So after we build that, we're going to start building a UI, because I want users to be able to see metrics of their function execution, and a nice UI that they can basically pick and choose which pieces they want to start their project with. So really enable that marketplace thing. So those are the things that I want to see for the 1.0.
Mm-hmm.
Cool. A couple of people in the chat room want to know when you're integrating blockchain with this.
Blockchain and AI blockchain.
Yeah, sure. all the buzzwords. Machine learning. You got to get machine learning in here somewhere.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Cool.
No, I don't know. Yeah.
Well, we have an ongoing challenge to get blockchain into every show now, no matter what it is. So that's where that question comes from. Some people have turned it into a drinking game, and hopefully they're not going to be doing that 3 weeks from now, because we have a show that's all about blockchain. So it's going to be a little tough.
I was trying to not say blockchain or machine learning, but.
Yes. Well, it's been wonderful chatting with you. We're almost out of time. Is there anything we didn't ask you that you want to make sure our audience is aware of before we have to let you go?
That's basically it. The part of I could really use some help, patches, contributions, and like Dan said, you don't really need to be an amazing programmer. Like I myself learned a lot of stuff about Ruby that I didn't know while I was doing this, because I dealing with like the internals of it. So if you do want to learn a lot about Ruby, contributing to this project, it's a good thing to do for that group.
Well, I do enjoy Ruby, the bit of time that I've actually spent with it. Again, it's like the child of my two favorite languages. So I should like it more, but I just never got into it. Did they ever get UTF-8 working right? Because I know they were having a lot of problems with Unicode for a while.
I recently, since I started faastRuby, I've never had that problem. Like a lot of the users are from Japan, actually, so I had to make sure that works. So at first I got some complaints, but then it was just like a little flag that I had to enable, and I never really had any problems. So I guess it's figured out.
Cool, because I remember when Ruby first came out, it was sort of ironic that it came out of Japan, but couldn't deal with anything besides Latin 1, which was just a little crazy to me. But that's how life is sometimes. So anything else you want to tell our audience, or are we sort of wrapping up here?
Yeah. Well, if you want to reach out to me, you can just send me an email, Paulo, if that's Paulo, at faastruby.io. Or reach out to me on Twitter at Arruda.
And did I understand correctly, you came from Brazil to Canada?
Yeah. So about that was in 2012. I moved here with my soon-to-be wife. But I spent about 28 years back home in Brazil, and then I moved to cold Canada. It was a funny story, actually, because I'm from Rio. And I left Rio on February 4th, which is like really hardcore summer.
Right.
The temperature was about like 45 Celsius. And when I got here, it was minus 27. So it was like,
wow, that's quite a spread. Yeah. Did you even have long pants?
Oh no! Like I had like several layers, but it was like I was naked. It was awful. But so my first winter here, I didn't even leave the house. Like I couldn't even smile because my teeth would hurt outside. It was just awful. Yeah. But then I learned to love it, man. Like now, I love snow. I discovered snowboarding after bumping my ass before a lot. But it's something that I try to do every year, and now I look forward to the winter, actually, because I have so much fun.
Yes, I've had the privilege of going to a conference nearly every year, except for the last couple of years in Porto Alegre, and so I would always plan a stopover for a week in Rio on either side of that conference, and so I've spent a lot of time in Rio and really enjoyed it. Just caipirinhas right there on the beach. Oh my God, that was so cool.
Did you stay in Copacabana or Ipanema?
Copacabana. Yeah. So, oh my God, this is so good. And foot volley. I tell you, I haven't seen that anywhere else. It is so amazing.
It's so hard though.
It looks really hard. So let me describe for our audience, in case you don't know what foot volley looks like. It's basically using soccer rules, but playing volleyball. So people would spike by jumping up on their hands and kicking with their feet over the net. It was so amazing to watch. It was just amazing to watch. Anyway, enough of that. We're out of time. Did I see Visual Studio Code in one of your examples? Are you using that?
Yes, I'm using VS Code, actually. It's my current favorite code editor.
Yeah, my current non-Emacs favorite editor. So I still do most of my work in Emacs, but when I start coding in Flutter or Dart, and now actually I'm starting to do some HTML work in it, some JavaScript work in it, because it just does more for me than Emacs does for all those things. And I figured out how to give it Emacs binding, so I'm happy because I've been using Emacs for 30 years. And what's your favorite scripting language?
Scripting language? Let's say Bash.
Okay, that'll work. That's fine. Hey, Paulo, it's been great having you on. You're a fun guy to talk to. Please ping me up again in about a year or so when you finally get 1.0 out, and we can see what your progress is like. But I really appreciate you coming on today, especially on short notice, because we had a cancellation at 1 p.m. yesterday, and you managed to pull it together. So thank you much.
Well, thank you, Randal, and thank you, Dan. I'm a big fan of Twitch, too, so it's an honor to be here. Okay, well, thank you, Paulo. Great. That was Paulo Arruda talking to us about faastRuby. What do you think there, Dan? I thought it was really, really interesting. Fascinating subject, actually, and what a great guest as well. I mean, you said you gave the game away there. We'd been discussing in our back channel how much we appreciate what he's doing this for, and the kind of giving back to open source. That's fantastic and really good to see. And it seems like a really interesting project. It makes me wish I was better at programming. Does that make sense? It makes me wish I had more call to use this project. Maybe I'll just do some personal stuff with it or something. But yeah, it's really, really interesting. And I think, I mean, as much as anyone can know what's going to happen with the future of the web, I do think that it seems to be moving this way a lot. And who knows, in 5 years' time, it could be huge. You know, it could be everyone's doing this kind of serverless approach, which, you know, serverless, although there is a server approach and so on. So who knows? I think he's got a really interesting project here, and I hope people will get involved. Yeah, and this is really sort of the migration of everything, because, you know, it's really hard to scale when you have an entire server that has to have all your code loaded into it. So that's hard to sort of dynamically ramp up and down. And so the movement for the last 10 years of moving towards containers, where you had just your application and a thin layer above that, so that you could roll those up and down, and that they didn't maintain state, so that you could destroy them or create them at will. That's what ZipRecruiter is moving to now. They're moving to Kubernetes and all the whole, nobody has any state, nobody has any logging. Logging all goes out through standard out, so it all gets gathered by various tools for that. But serverless has really only been around for, I think, 2 or 3 years. It's a really recent innovation. And one of the things that, when I saw this presentation at OSCON, I think it was a couple of years ago, that really sort of enamored me was that everybody's got a plan where you don't pay until you get to like 100,000 hits a month. I mean, AWS and Google Cloud and everybody that's in this game. So you could essentially start deploying your app until the point where you could start monetizing it, and then use that monetization then to pay for the remaining hits.
But it's great that they all have this sort of free tier at the bottom, so you can experiment and not have to worry about, well, I'm paying a nickel a hit. How am I going to deal with that during development? So it's all free up until that threshold gets hit. So I thought about just doing some random stuff with this. I think Dart is now a first-class client for Google's cloud, which would be nice because then I could write little functions in Dart and deploy them in the cloud. So it's going to be pretty fun. So. Yeah, that's what's going on for me about this. But yeah, I love the guy's attitude. I was a little worried
definitely.
Before we started the show, as you saw in the chat room, that because the server side was not open source yet, but now he laid out a complete explanation of why he did that way. And I'm glad that he's moving towards open sourcing it, because I think it's going to be, having an open source stack from top to bottom ensures no vendor lock-in, ensures if he goes out of business tomorrow, you're still able to continue all those things that we've come to learn and love about open source software. So really appreciate that he gets the attitude there for that, and he's moving towards that direction. Anything else, Dan, before I start wrapping up?
No, I mean, I would just echo that kind of sentiment. It's good to see.
Yeah, absolutely. So let's talk about next week. Ironically, I'll be at the Perl conference, but I'll be talking to my friend Todd Lewis about all things open. So that's fun. I've been selected as I'm press at All Things Open. I just got my rejection letter though, so I'm not actually speaking at the conference. But that conference has 5,000 people, and they had hundreds of talks submitted for their limited number of slots. So I don't feel too bad that I wasn't selected. I'll have other places. In fact, I was selected. Not to skip ahead to where I'm going to be soon, but I just got selected again as a guest at DragonCon, which means I have the sort of speaker status that the 400 of us do out of the 40,000 people that are attending. And I've also been accepted to do a Flutter talk there at DragonCon. So I will be doing that same talk, which will be fun. So next week, All Things Open, Todd Lewis can talk to us about his conference that happens in Raleigh, North Carolina, now for, I think, 7 or 8 years, and 4,000 attendees. It's huge. It's huge, huge. All right. OPSI after that, it's open source client management system to manage heterogeneous environments. CX, here's the blockchain episode. Yeah, I know you're waiting for it. CX is general purpose interpreted and compiled programming language with a very strict type system and a syntax similar to Golang. And it's basically providing a way for you to write Ethereum contracts in a reasonable language besides JavaScript. Micronaut, which is a modern JVM-based full-stack framework for building modular, easily testable microservice and serverless applications. Whoa, we're going to do serverless again. And then right after that, something's called Serverless Framework, which is an easy deploy for serverless apps. So we've got, I guess this is the quarter of serverless. we had the quarter of cloud, we had the quarter of blockchain, and now we're back to the quarter of serverless. So start studying up on serverless, guys, because we're going to need it for these shows coming up. If you go to twit.tv/floss, that's the homepage for this show. You can see who we've got and who we're talking to coming up. I know one particular client or one particular guest that's not going to ever be invited back, but that's just another story. All right. But if you go there and the project you want is not on there, please have the project leader or community coordinator email me at merlin@stonehenge.com. My address is right there on the homepage. We have a live stream when we're taping. This week, again, as usual, is 9:30 a.m. Pacific time on Wednesdays at live.twit.tv. You can watch us behind the scenes. You can also ask questions, as a few of our guests or a few of our chat room people did. You can follow us at FLOSS Weekly on Twitter. You can follow me at Merlin on Twitter. I'm still trying to set up some sort of collective shared blog that all of my co-hosts can post to, like we'd used to with Google Plus, but still looking. I'm thinking Medium's going to be it, but I got to read a little bit more about that. I'll be at the Pro Conference next week in Pittsburgh. If you're out there in that way, come on by, say hi to me. I'm probably going to be out and about every evening, so watch my tweets, watch my Foursquare check-ins, and maybe you can bump into me when I'm out and about. I'm going to be at OSCON in Portland in mid-July. My hometown, so it's easier to get to. I'm just pressed there. I don't have a speaker role. I'm going to be at DragonCon, confirmed now, as a guest. That's Labor Day weekend in Atlanta. I'm going to be giving my Flutter talk, and I'm going to be giving I'm on 3 other panels, and that's going to be a lot of fun. I actually need a vacation after that, because that's such an exhausting 5 days. It's so crazy. And also All Things Open in Raleigh, North Carolina in mid-October. There are extremely cheap tickets still available. I think $99 to attend the whole thing if you're in or can get to the Raleigh, North Carolina area in mid-October. They still have some sort of discount for that. Also, just a little tip, but I'm sure we'll talk about this with Todd Lewis next week, is that if you apply to be a speaker and you're rejected, you still get a free pass to the conference. That is an incredibly generous offer. I don't know any other organization that does that. So, I mean, obviously you get a free pass if you're a speaker, but if you're a rejected speaker, you get a free pass. So everybody pitch a talk. Everybody pitch a talk and make it even harder for me to get in next year. Oh, yeah. Anything you want to plug there, Dan?
Yeah, a couple of events actually. Funnily enough, seeing as we're on a theme at the moment. So we had a Caroline, a friend of mine, who was a guest on a couple of months ago now, 2-3 months ago, sure, about Liverpool Make Fest, and that's actually coming up in the end of the month. So it's like less than 3 weeks away now. It's about 2.5 weeks. It's the 29th of June. If you're in the UK and you can get to Liverpool, it's really worth it. If you're interested in anything to do with physical computing, making, there's also art and craft stuff and all kinds of other stuff going on. So it's completely free to attend. It's all day. It's at Liverpool Central Library. If you just search for Liverpool Make Fest or go to liverpoolmakefest.org, which is the website, you can find out all about it on there and find out stuff that's going on there. So please check that out. And also, I'm deep in the preparation for OggCamp, which is our largest community open source event in the UK. We're not quite up to all things open level yet, but we're trying. And it's our 10th anniversary this year. So we're currently looking for sponsors. If you go to oggcamp.org, oggcamp.org, there's a sponsor pack on there, or obviously people can contact me via Twitter or through my website, email me, all that kind of stuff. And we'll be announcing tickets and some of the sponsors and other things coming up soon. So it's kind of event central around here at the moment.
Awesome. And I've still got a tickler item to look at, actually making it to OggCamp, since I'll be on the East Coast for all things open. So I'm still kind of looking at that. I have to be in San Francisco like the following weekend, so it's going to be some quite heavy time zone transitions for me. And I hope they don't. I hope they don't start the ETAs for U.S. people before that, because I hear they're going to start that soon. Even going to the UK, we have to get ETA, which is just crazy. I think it's like tit for tat, though. I think we're doing that to people in Europe, so I think it's probably coming up for them. Well, you won't be part of the EU soon, so we don't know, actually, do we?
But nobody knows what's going on. Nobody knows right now what's going on.
Nobody knows who your next prime minister is going to be, and it's all the candidates look kind of ugly, so it's going to be interesting.
Yeah, it's going to be real interesting.
I think the UK and the US are competing for how low we can go. I think that's all.
It feels a bit like limbo, doesn't it, at the moment? It's like a whole limbo bar. Yeah.
And that's all the politics I want to do on this show today. But
before we get dragged off air.
that was a fun show. Glad we were still able to have a show at the last minute. Thanks for I think Simon set that up. No, the guest that canceled actually set this up. So that was even cooler that a guest would say, "I'm not going to be there, but here, have this person instead." So that was awesome. Anyway, we'll see you all again next week on FLOSS Weekly.